there, YouTube! Welcome to another special Dannphan video here on the Dannphan channel. Today, we're going to be talking about comic regrets. Ooh, spooky. Now, obviously, this is not a typical video that I would make talking about my past comics. Usually, if you are a comic creator, you always want to be hyping your comics up. But today, I wanted to kind of talk about some of the comic books I've done in the past, some regrets I have while making said comics, and then hopefully draw some lessons from them that I can share with you, and then this can be kind of like a little Dannphan's advice. The first most prominent comic regret that I have in my mind actually involves the first comic campaign that I had done. And naturally, whenever you do your first campaign, you're bound to make mistakes, right? You're bound to just leap in all the wrong directions. It only makes sense, and I expect it from other people who are also going out there and doing their first campaigns to make a few mistakes here and there. My first comic campaign was a bizarre one. It was the infamous Oh Girl, or at least that's what I call it for YouTube's sake. Are we past the 1 minute mark yet? The full name of that comic was Orgasm Girl. And before you ask, no, it was not porn, although the title was definitely a mistake. Google flags that title all the time, and it is an issue, of course. The first comic campaign was this mess called Orgasm Girl, which was not a very unique take per se. I'm sure I've heard like certain instances where Marvel has also dipped their hands into this idea for a superpower, you know, being able to seduce, make people, as the title says, but I wanted to kind of dip my hands into the idea of making a saucy comic based around that concept. And originally I was planning to make it a webcomic, just to do something a little experimental, just to be working on something. That was one of the concepts I had in mind, and I ended up talking with an artist who was interested in drawing the comic and wanted to do a whole campaign for it, and was so certain that this idea, this concept is definitely going to make some sales. However, of course, the artist that I originally paired up with eventually would dip out of the project because he didn't actually have time to work on it. And I kind of saw it coming. I held in there with like the hope over his word that, oh yeah, I'll work on it. Just wait a few more. I'm getting to it, you know, procrastinating. I knew eventually, like, there's no way you have time for this comic. Even if he could not admit it himself, I just knew it was gonna probably end up that way. And because of that, when I first announced the comic, there ended up being a ton of delays for the actual campaign to get out there. And I ended up switching artists, and then the two other people who were involved were both the first artists' friends, so I didn't really have a big personal connection with them. The first campaign ended up not funding entirely. Then I ran a second campaign with just one other artist who I knew more closely, and we kind of tag teamed together to get that first comic done. Although granted, I lost my passion for this comic even before the first campaign launched, just because of all like the demotivating things that were happening behind the scenes. Obviously, first lesson to take from this campaign is don't work with someone who does not have time to do the comic. You have to make sure that the people who are working with you are 100% on board. When you're doing a campaign for your first comic project, you should have it be something that you are familiar with, or that you specialize in. And Orgasm Girl was not that for me. I don't feel like it's very representative of the type of comics I usually do. In a lot of ways, it was, like I said, originally supposed to be a webcomic, originally supposed to be just an experimental thing that I wanted to try out to see if I enjoy doing more saucy type comics, or if I could find success down that route. And at the end of the day, when I finished up writing it and everything, it just wasn't what I wanted it to be. Granted, I did have to make it a much shorter comic than I originally intended for that first issue, which is why it ends on a to be continued, because I had to rework the original story that was supposed to be the webcomic. When it finally got done and the script finally got done and everything, I wasn't really that happy with it. That's not saying that it's a bad comic or that I'm looking down on anyone who enjoyed that comic, but it was very different from what I usually do, and because of that, I would never look at that comic as being the peak Dannphan writing, of course. And also it set up the stage so that I would look like someone who primarily does saucy comics, which is not at all what I am or what I do. But because that's the first campaign that I put out there, that might be the impression that people have, is that I'm known for that, or that's my main thing. Years later, I'm still trying to tell people, no, that's not my main thing. That's something that I did as like an experimental thing just to like get something out there. I didn't intend for it to be a campaign at first, yada yada yada, you know, you go down the list of excuses, but at the end of the day, it was your decision. It was a bad decision. There definitely are a whole list of lessons that you can take from that first campaign of mine alone, but I think those are the two main ones. Make sure who you're working with, you work well with them, and that they have time to dedicate to a project. And then second, don't come forward with a comic that you're not 100% certain on. Now, my second comic regret. This one, I'm not sure if it really deserves to be on this list, but I felt the need to bring it up. One of the first comics that I dedicated a lot of time to, and a lot of years to, just for it to not really matter at all, was a webcomic that I wrote way back in the day, and it's not good. So don't get your hopes up thinking, oh man, I'm gonna search online and find this super buried webcomic that Dannphan used to do. It's gonna be so awesome. More Dannphan content for free? Yeah. No. It's awful. It was a webcomic called Street Levelers. I got into doing this webcomic during a fascination I had with superheroes. I wanted to do my own superhero universe. Oh wow! Never heard of that before, right guys? So unique. I was not very good at art in this particular moment of my life. In fact, when I started working on the webcomic, I was just then starting to draw again. I spent a lot of my life not really knowing what career direction I was going in. And then when I just decided, hey, maybe I should try to get better at art, that's when I started to work on this webcomic. Not the best decision, I would say, but even if I just wanted to do it for fun, it's like, who cares, whatever. The critique I have is just how much time I put into it, and I was like planning out big, long story arcs and everything, arcs that never once got completed, of course. Very few people were actually interested in that webcomic since it was not really good. It was not really that great. The art was pretty mediocre, right? It also had like a lot of tone deaf moments in there where like it was kind of half comedic and half serious, and it didn't really mix well. Funny enough, I did get a good handful of actually talented artists who were interested in my webcomic, be it for just the stories or the OC characters or whatever it was. 3 different artists would like try to help me work on making the art better. I had like guest artists draw entire chapters for me and stuff like that, which was absolutely mind-blowing, honestly, looking back at it, because as I said, the comic itself was not very good. It was very mediocre, and I would not even look back at that comic as being something that I would necessarily want on a comic creating resume, because it was certainly not peak Dannphan writing. I still look back at it though with a modern charm. Like, some of the characters I made, some of the concepts, it wasn't that bad, you know? Sometimes I muse to myself, like, oh, what if I rebooted it? And what if I tried to go back and, like, fix the mistakes, polish it up? What if I try to launch a rebooted version of the same universe, but tweak it here and there, do a proper introduction of each of the characters, etc., etc.? I could probably make it much better in modern day, but the amount of time that I wasted on this webcomic that wasn't really going anywhere was very silly. And I feel like a lot of people get into the mindset of, oh, well, he made One Punch Man and that art was super bad, right? But it became super famous and he's now like super rich and stuff, and I want to be super famous and super rich, so I don't have to be good at art to make a masterpiece, because he did it. It's a bad mindset to get in. You should always be striving to be better and better and better. You shouldn't just like settle for something and then treat your creations as being like a ticket into the lottery. It was like, oh, maybe this time I'll win and I'll just be super famous and rich. You should make art actual art and not just you taking a random chance. When I was doing the digital work for Street Levelers, this is gonna sound super crazy for the artists listening, I didn't have a drawing tablet, but I tried to do digital artwork anyway, and I think I did successfully do like 2 or 3 chapters digitally myself, without the aid of other artists. Not having a drawing tablet while trying to do it digitally was quite a hassle. You might be thinking, oh, so you drew on the computer mouse, right? That's pretty archaic. But no, not even the computer mouse. I used a laptop trackpad. Just like that. To this day, my hand is still super fucked from trying to draw like that. I still like have semi-pain just from holding it in that claw formation. It's funny too, because like even as I was doing it, I knew, oh man, this is gonna super fuck up my hand. But I did it anyway, and that was stupid. Don't do that. That's another big comic regret right there, is that I permanently fucked up my hand for a shitty webcomic that did not get famous. As I've mentioned in another video, do one-shots. Do something easy and achievable for your first few projects. Don't waste your time on something that's gonna take forever to finish, especially if it's your first thing. Stupid. I was dumb. Alright, third comic book making regret that I will share with you on this video might shock some of you. It is a newer one. It's Sonic City Witch, which just came out with issue 3 on the website recently. Go check it out if you haven't already. Sonic City Witch is actually a comic that I started making roughly 4 years ago. And it is basically a 4-issue miniseries. Originally, I planned for it to just be a graphic novel story, and I do plan next year to print all the issues into one graphic novel and do a whole relaunch where I just have all the story contained in one thing, because I was in general not a big fan of splitting it up into 4 issues, but it works. It functions as a story still. As you can probably tell though, it shouldn't have taken this long to get it done, because ultimately it's probably going to be 5 years until the whole thing is completed. Which goes back to what I said before, don't work on a project that will take you a super long time to finish. And Sonic City Witch is another example of that. Even though it's obviously not as poorly written as Street Levelers, it's not nearly as bad looking as Street Levelers, because I do have an artist working on it with me, and he's fantastic, as you can probably see. But all this being said, it's just too long to be working on a single comic. Like, the story was already written when I started this project with Alex, and then as time went on, I started to change as a writer and change my opinions about the story. So I started rewriting things. Even now, I changed my mind about the ending recently this year, and I started working with another writer to help me change the ending. The last 2 issues are rewritten from what they used to be. And when I rewrote those with the now co-writer Adam, we still had to work within the constraints that were set up in the first 2 issues that were already being published. We had to make sure it all still aligned together even though we were changing the ending. And that was, in of itself, a challenge. That's also just kind of what happens when you work on a project for a very long time, is that as you're changing, change in your ability, you change in your writing style, and you want the new comics that you're coming out with to reflect your current state of writing, your current abilities. I don't want a story that I wrote 4 years ago to come out now as though that is somehow reflective of what I am currently capable of writing. And it's all the more reason why I don't think it's a good idea to take a very long time writing just one story. But even more so, I feel like a lot of people have forgotten about Sonic City Witch, because everyone was fairly hyped up about Sonic City Witch when I first announced that it was happening, but then the issues are so far apart from one another. I mean, it's basically a year per issue with Sonic City Witch. That's way too long, and people forget about it. They forget that it was ever a thing. And so there's not nearly as many sales as you get further. Like, there's a bunch of sales on issue 1, right? But then issue 2, you see a huge drop off, and then it continues down the line, and you just kind of have to expect that. Regardless, you know, I've already dedicated this much time to doing it, so I might as well finish it. It's not bad, don't get me wrong. None of these comics, well, except for Street Levelers. Street Levelers is bad. They're not really awful comics. It's just that they had issues with it that I regret. I could have done a much smoother, much better job with a lot of these comics, knowing the knowledge that I know today. And so I just wanted to kind of share with you some of those experiences, because some of you probably need to hear this before you do whatever comic project you're going to be working on. Hear some of my horror stories to help motivate you. If you would like to check out some of these comics, or perhaps something newer, you can go to burningstarcomics.net. And for those of you who are working on your own comic projects and are thinking of submitting to Burning Star Comics, yes, you can submit your own comic, your own one-shots, if you will. Submissions will be open for a few months, so make sure that you get something that you can show me, and perhaps we will even put it on the 2024 release schedule. Fun stuff. If you'd like to see some sneak peeks at some current projects I'm working on, you can always go join the fan club on Subscribestar. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you learned something generally from this video. If you did, remember to like, subscribe. I'll see you next time, guys. Bye!
Program restart.